Good day to you all. My name is Sandro and I'm absolutely thrilled, honoured and delighted to be with you today. Of course, not in person, which is very unfortunate, but I'm sure we'll get the opportunity to see each other in the not too distant future. But just the opportunity to participate in your wonderful MDRT Day Indonesia is absolutely humbling, and I'm so grateful for the invitation. In the 30 minutes or so that we have together today, I want to share with you 4 ways to get to the top, to be the very best you can be. Before I share those 4 secrets with you, I want to take you back, if I may, to 1989. 1989 was the year, it was October, when I started in this wonderful profession. And I started working as an apprentice with a man called Tony. And Tony was a very successful individual in the financial services business. In fact, he was referred to as a legend in the financial services business. Why? Because Tony was financially very successful. He lived in a big house and he drove a very nice car, and I looked up to Tony. But it was only after a short while that I started to realize that Tony was very transactional. He was the stereotypical financial advisor who would sell products to people. He didn't much care for service. He was really just interested in making lots of money for himself. And that's where I realized my opportunity lay. The opportunity to start to question every aspect of the financial services process. I started to look at the words I used, or I was encouraged to use. I looked at the telephone technique that I was being encouraged to use. I looked at objection handling and the process and my service model. And I built what I like to think is a fabulously successful business over the 27 or 28 years that followed, when I eventually found the courage to start my own business. If you like, I inverted the financial services model. In looking at every single aspect of the business and questioning whether the things that I had been taught really did work, I didn't really subscribe to the idea of making 100 phone calls in order to make 2 sales. That just didn't seem very efficient to me. So I started to look at every aspect of the business, and I want to share with you 4 of those aspects of the business which I have found to be fundamental to the success I've enjoyed in financial services and as a 25-year MDRT top of the table member. Before I do that, I just want to take you to 1991, because it took me 2 years in financial services to find the courage to start having real conversations with people. Now, when I was 9 years old, my father Leo, who was a very, very successful man, he ran 3 restaurant businesses. My mum, Carol, looked after a large house, and there were 4 children, all under the age of 9, when unfortunately my father, having been diagnosed with lung cancer, passed away in 1976. I was just coming up to my 9th birthday. I was a small boy. I didn't understand the horrors my father faced over those 2 years as he battled a terrible, terrible disease. But what was really significant about my father's passing was the fact that my mother, who was just not prepared for any of these kind of financial eventualities, no one, of course, at the age of 50 thought my father would pass away. Within 2 years of my father's death, my mother was declared bankrupt. We lost the family home, and the businesses that my father had previously run had to be passed to his sister, my auntie. In that short space of time between affluence and losing everything, I started to get a real idea of what it took to be successful in life. One of those issues, one of those problems or challenges that many people unfortunately face is something I refer to as a paradigm. A paradigm is a belief system that has no basis for reality. Let me give you an example. Because as I was growing up, as my father Leo was building these amazingly successful businesses, financial advisors and accountants and solicitors would walk past my father Leo in the street, and they would make the assumption that just because Leo Forte was very, very successful, he must already be getting financial advice, or he must be getting legal or tax advice. And the reality was, my father was just too busy to focus on the financial aspects of his life. As much as he may have wanted to look at those things and consider those things, And as much as he may have wanted to engage with a financial professional, he didn't have the time. Cash rich, time poor, we've heard that expression before. And so in that short period of time between my father's diagnosis and my father's passing, I learned an awful lot about life and indeed in time to come business as well. But the real lesson came when my stepfather, Dave, a lovely, lovely man, came into our family when I was 13 years of age. My mum and my stepfather, Dave, got married. They had another child, so now there's 5 of us, and we are living in welfare or council accommodation, a 2-bedroom property, and there we were all squeezed into this tiny little house with absolutely no money. But we were so happy. We had a childhood that was joyful and sunny, and all the days were long. And in the time that I built an amazing relationship with Dave, I started to learn so much about life. He was my best friend in the world. He was my confidant. He was my teacher. And he encouraged me to be the very best version of myself. He always said, focus on the process in life, Sandro. Don't worry about the outcome. And I thought about that in financial services terms, because isn't it true that we judge each other, and sometimes we judge ourselves very much by the outcome? If a prospect says, yes, let's do business, we consider that success. And if they say no, or they raise an objection that we can't overcome, we consider that failure. And we are judged and assessed by the sales we make. I am going to suggest to you today that if you invert that process, if you start to think a different way, greater success will follow. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the process, because the process is the one part of life and business that we can control. And I'm going to share with you 4 things that if you take control of these things and you practice them until they become subconscious habits, I guarantee that you will get to top of the table in whatever time frame you desire. Every one of us has the ability to be brilliant. We are already brilliant. Many, many years ago, you did the first brilliant thing that you did in your life, and that was probably to learn to talk, or possibly even before that to walk. And typically your mother or father would show you that by putting one foot in front of another and maintaining a bit of balance, you could move from one place in life to another more effectively than the way you did it before. And in your little brain, you would say, wow, this is a much more effective way. I'm going to try this. But because the little voice, and by the way, the little voice is that little imaginary friend that you carry around on your shoulder that gives you 100 reasons every day why you can't achieve things. Because the little voice likes to keep us comfortable. It's the same little voice that at the beginning of every year, when we create our New Year's resolutions, this year I'm going to be MDRT's #1 advisor in Indonesia. This year I'm going to spend more time with my family. This year I'm going to have an extra vacation. And at the end of the year, when we don't achieve those goals, the little voice whispers in our ear and says, don't worry, there's always next year. And so we kick the metaphorical can down the road for years and years and years, finding that by making excuses, we feel nice and comfortable. Well, it was my manager's fault. If the economy wasn't so bad, I'd have sold more. If I had more time available, if I didn't have illness to deal with, there's always an excuse. We call them reasons, but realistically, they are very much excuses. And so what I started to understand was that if I could take the ideas that I was learning in business and transfer them to my subconscious mind, and they became habits, I could drive success in a learned way. At the moment, for many people, success is very much a conscious thing. So when things get in our way, when we decide that today we're going to be at the top of our game, the #1 salesperson in our company, and there is a gap between the day we make a decision and the day we desire that outcome, unfortunately, things get in the way. And generally speaking, we call those life. There are obstacles, there are challenges, and there are things we have to overcome along the way. The only way to sustainable motivation, the only way to remain in the game, to continue going regardless of what life throws at us, is for us to be subconsciously successful, to learn success as we learn anything else. And I'm going to show you how to do that today. In order to be successful, in order to avoid regret, I often say when I travel the world and speak to audiences, there are two things that are painful in life. Discipline is one of them, and regret is the other. They're both painful. But my second guarantee of the day, ladies and gentlemen, is if you don't do the first one in life, you will always get the second. If you don't do the first one, if you don't have discipline in your life and in your business, you will always have regret by definition. So step number one to achieving successful outcomes, to getting to the top in 3 months or less. And this, by the way, is not a throwaway promise. Every one of us here today has proven in our short or long career so far that we have the ability to engage with new clients, to take them through a process, to make a recommendation, and to build a relationship. So I'm not here today to teach you how to do that. You can already do that for yourselves. It's what makes you brilliant. What I'm suggesting here is that the application of what you already know in a subconscious way, more often than you do it right now, can take you anywhere you want to go in this business. So step number one is to build a brilliant mindset. Now, I'm not suggesting that I'm here today to talk to you about positive mental attitude. Anyone can motivate us. They can stand on a stage and tell us how amazing we are. We can read a brilliant book. We can get to the end of that process and we can decide that today is going to be the best day ever, that the next 6 months are going to be the most productive in our career. But the reality, unfortunately, is the very next day or the very next week, we drop back into those habits that we had before. By the way, before we talk about mindset and turning success into something subconscious, let me just also mention, as part of that process that I went through as a young man at the age of 21 in the business for the first time, I'd analyze and look at words like referral. And I would think, is that really a good word to use? Because for me, a referral is a name and a telephone number. And I don't know about you, but I'm not in the business of referrals. I don't want to make cold calls because when I get a name and a telephone number, I'm forced to effectively make a cold call. And we've all been in that situation, haven't we? When we've called a new prospect, a referral from another, and they don't know who we are, they don't know who the referrer is, and it leads to a very, very awkward conversation. On the other hand, using the words personal introduction implies that in addition to the name and the telephone number, we'll also get personally introduced. Other words like appointment. It is statistically proven that there is a 17% greater likelihood that someone will cancel an appointment on you rather than a meeting. So why don't we call them meetings? In the minds of our clients, they are much more professional than appointments. Doctors and dentists have appointments. Financial professionals have meetings. So start to think about small incremental changes to help you become more successful. And avoid using the words insurance and earn. These are all words that prospects may see as quite negative. If you haven't already read my book, and this is not a commercial plug, all of this material is contained in that just to give you a steer. But have a think about some of the fundamentals, some of the basics, the language that you use. Let's now have a look at mindset, because to be subconsciously successful, we have to take goals away from our conscious minds. Simply writing down goals at the beginning of the year and thinking, pretending that somehow we're going to achieve those goals, and we might achieve one or two by default. The reality is that when interference gets in the way, we are a lot less likely to achieve our goals and objectives than if they are subconscious goals. And the only really effective way to create a subconscious goal that becomes a learned habit so that it starts to affect the things you say, the way you act, the way you carry yourself, and the way you engage with new prospective clients is to write down your goals, one on each postcard. Get a packet of 20 to 30 plain postcards or pieces of paper And on every one of those 20 to 30 cards, I would like you to write one goal. Now, before anyone says, well, wait a minute, Sandro, I don't have 20 to 30 goals, I would challenge you straight away. Everyone has at least 20 to 30 goals, probably a lot more. And the way to determine those goals is to think about every aspect of your life: spiritual, physical, family, the business, other things that you might want to achieve. In all of those different areas, think about 2 or 3, 4 goals in each of those areas, whether they are small goals, large goals, medium term, long term, short term. What you're doing this coming weekend is a goal. The extra bedtime story for your children is a goal. A meal with your significant other is a goal. But also think about unrealistic goals. You know, with great respect intended, I don't like SMART goals, because one of the rules of SMART goals, as we know, is that they should be realistic. But what's wrong with an unrealistic goal? Because the one thing I've learned in 31 years is that people fail in life not because they aim too high and miss. People fail in life because they aim too low and hit. Now, I can give you hundreds of examples of when people have set an expectation which is comfortable. Okay, we may achieve it, but we don't achieve anything like our true potential. And amongst my goal cards, I have goals, one of which, for example, is appearing on the front cover of Men's Health magazine was testament to my dietary and training disciplines, looking and feeling great. Now, will I ever appear on the front cover of Men's Health magazine? Probably not. There is a very, very small chance that that will happen, if it happens at all. But you know what? For the last 2.5 years, without fail, every single weekday, Monday to Friday in the UK, I have trained from 7 a.m. until 8 a.m. And if it wasn't possible, I would find another time during the day. I have not missed a training day. Now, that's not because I love the gym, not because I'm desperate to appear on the front cover of Men's Health magazine, but because subconsciously I am driven towards that goal every day. If consciously I was thinking about getting fit in the gym, there would be plenty of occasions where it was dark or cold or it was raining and I think, I'm not sure I'm going to go to the gym today. I'll do it tomorrow. And isn't that true of what we all do from time to time? But when it's part of my subconscious, I do it without thinking. I find an inner motivation that I didn't have subconsciously. So when we write down these 20 to 30 goals, mixing them all up, big, small, long-term, medium-term, we write them all down, one goal on one card, and there are 2 rules that we must adopt when we create these goals. Rule number 1, write down the goal as if it has already happened. In other words, it's in the past tense. There is a specific reason for that. Your subconscious brain does not know the difference between what is real and what is imagined. And if we can convince our subconscious that we have already achieved the goal, we are more likely to migrate, to move towards that place. The second thing we have to do to introduce an emotional attachment to that goal is to describe how we felt. So, meeting the Queen for tea was the best feeling in the world ever. I feel so humbled and proud. Now, that was a goal I created 11 years ago, and I got to achieve that objective for a whole bunch of reasons I don't have time to tell you today. But that was driven subconsciously. I started to do things I was not consciously aware of that led me to that place. All I'd ask you to do with those 20 to 30 goals, not more, not less, is to read those goals every day, ideally at the same time, maybe before you go to bed. Don't learn them, don't study them, just read the goals, put them down and repeat the process the next day. And repeat that process every day. Do not miss a day. If you do, the 30-day cycle to achieving a habit will have to start again. Now, if you were able to do that for 90 consecutive days, let me tell you, your growth in your mind will be exponential. The second rule I want to share with you is creating a process. Now, there are lots of different aspects to our business that involve a process, but the one I'm going to focus on just for now, for the MDRT day in Indonesia, is the first meeting that you have with your client. Now, this is something you may not have heard before, but it is the one part of the process that will have the greatest determining factor in terms of your success. Now, I go back over 30 years in this business, as I've said, and one of the things that I was always taught by trainers and managers and colleagues in the profession was that somehow, for some reason, financial advisors had to adopt this subservient approach. In other words, we would meet a prospect, we would conduct a fact find, we'd make a presentation, and then somehow we hoped that the client would choose us to do business with them. And the reason why so many of us find life challenging is because we get constant rejection. So one of the things that I looked at when I started in the business was, how do I avoid objections occurring in the first place? How do I avoid rejections? And the very best way to do this is to create a set of rules at the first meeting that both you and the client will work to together. So typically the words I use would be things like, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, the reason we are meeting today is, I believe, for two reasons. The first reason is we're here to see whether we like each other, trust each other, and can work with one another. And the second reason is for me to see if I can help you, to gather information. But all I'm going to say is that the quality of advice I'm able to give you is based on the quality of information you give to me. Now, there are two things I've just done in creating these rules. The first one is I have told my prospect subconsciously that we are here to decide whether we like each other, whether we trust each other, and whether we want to work together. In other words, it's not just the client's choice. I get to hire or fire the client as well. If I don't like them, I don't trust them, I don't think they're committed to the relationship or to the process of financial planning, I get the opportunity to walk away. And that is a subconscious seed I sow in the mind of the prospect right at the beginning. The second thing is I tell them I'm going to gather information. And the quality of advice I'm able to give is based on the quality of information they give to me. In other words, they are accountable for the advice I give. And it eliminates them saying things like, oh, I feel uncomfortable giving you this information, that's confidential. Because they know that if they miss anything out, they get inferior advice, and no one wants that. This is also the opportunity, by the way, to introduce any other things that may cause you a problem. When I was 21, I looked 14, so I knew my age was and inexperience was a problem. So I would find a way of overcoming that subconscious, unwritten objection, the elephant in the room, if you like. And I would say to my prospects, before we go any further, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, this young man looks like he's barely left school. What can he tell us that we don't already know? Well, the one thing, as a qualified advisor, I can give you that very few other advisors in the UK can offer is long-term service. And I would say it with a smile on my face. They would laugh. The elephant was well and truly out of the room. So if you sell a more expensive product, or if there's been some adverse publicity about your company recently, or if you want to deal with the previous experience they may have had with another financial advisor, or the current economic situation, this is the time to create the rules. It's your agenda. It's not the client's agenda. So it's very, very important. Also, during the fact find, instead of asking for personal introductions, instruct the client to give you personal introductions. What I mean by that is when you're talking to somebody about what would happen to you in the event of your death, how many children do you have? We have 2. Who would look after your children if you passed away? That would be my brother and sister-in-law. And who would be responsible for administering your estate? Well, that's my wife's sister and her husband. Okay, so I now have 6 names. At some point during the end of the process, as I'm concluding and arranging the second meeting, I say, if we decide to do business, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, I will need to meet these people, because in providing a full 360-degree holistic service, I need to make sure they know who I am, they build a relationship with me, they know where the insurance policy is, they know where the money is, because so many people die and have no idea where all of their documentation or how to access the money and where they go to for help. So I need to meet these people because people never question you if they believe it's part of the process. So take control of that process, make it your agenda, and you will grow exponentially in terms of the success you achieve with new clients. And the third idea that I have for you today is to create an experience. Now, what I mean by experience, it's a bit like Starbucks or McDonald's. People don't go to McDonald's for a great meal, do they? And they probably don't go to Starbucks for an amazing coffee. We can get a much better cup of coffee just down the road in the local cafe, but there's a reason we go to Starbucks. Maybe it's the Wi-Fi when it's working, or the comfortable chair, or the free newspaper. People get to hang out in a comfortable environment where they can watch the world go by, and that is the success of Starbucks. Apple, for example, do not have necessarily a superior product to Samsung, but there is an experience they create for you. And it's the same with McDonald's and many, many other successful brands around the world. So the question I have for all of you is, what do your clients get from the moment they walk in your metaphorical door to the moment they leave? And that is a big, big question. And I'm going to give you a simple equation to remember. Please write this down and remember it forever. Your reputation as a financial professional is the experience you give to your prospects and your new clients minus the expectation they walk into your world with. Your reputation is the experience you deliver minus the expectation the client has before they meet you. If you exceed expectation, your reputation grows. If you don't, your reputation falls. It's a very, very simple analogy, something to remember. How do you exceed expectation? Easy. When you take on a client for the first time, you ask them the killer question. Here's the killer question. Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, what does great service look like to you exactly? What does great service look like to you exactly? Some people will say, I need to see you every 3 months. I'm recently divorced. I feel vulnerable. I don't really know much about financial planning. Can you hold my hand? Other people may say, I'll call you when I need you. As long as you create an experience that exceeds the expectation, you win. If you don't, you lose. And the way to grow a business, particularly through personal introduction, is to exceed expectation. But you can only exceed expectation when you know what the expectation is. So whether that's regularly staying in touch with what I call hello calls, just randomly picking up the phone and having conversations with people. We all have a cell phone. In that cell phone, there are hundreds of names and telephone numbers. When was the last time you phoned 20 or 30 random people in your phone and just said, hello, how are you? Only one of two things will happen when you make random phone calls. Either the person you call will be delighted that you called them and they will say, thank you, that's a very nice thing for you to do. A bit like calling them on their birthday. You are the only financial professional, the only professional probably, that calls a prospect or client on their birthday. Otherwise, it's friends and family. Or they will say, how are you? Because they will always respond to you when you say, how are you? They will always say something like, I'm fine, thank you, how are you? And you say, couldn't be better, really busy, helping some of my other clients with 1 or 2 really great financial planning ideas that's making them a lot of money or saving them a lot of tax. And that will pique the interest in the person you're speaking to. They will say, inevitably, what is it you're doing? What are you saying to these people? Well, to be honest, I'm only calling you to say hello. There was no other reason for that. I saw on social media that your son had just started school, so I was only ringing to wish him and you all the best. But if you do want to have a conversation, let's grab a coffee on another occasion. Nothing can ever go wrong. There's only one outcome, and it's positive. So let's get back to making those phone calls. Let's get back to realizing that success in this business comes from activity. And we don't need to overanalyze whether we're speaking to a friend or a family member or a former colleague. It is our responsibility to have conversations with people. We have information that we need to share with people, especially in the modern world where people are more aware of their mortality than ever before, and probably for several generations to come. This is an amazing opportunity, and we should be speaking to as many people as possible. Forget the outcome. Forget whether they say yes or no. Our job, it is incumbent upon us to have conversations with people. And the final thing to determine any degree of success you want to achieve is to take positive action. My stepfather Dave came into my family when I was 13 years of age, and when I was 21 and I started in the business, my stepfather Dave, my best friend in the world, was my number one prospect. He was right at the top of my list that Tony asked me to create when I first started. And for 2 years I procrastinated. For 2 years I found any excuse possible not to have a conversation with Dave. Why? Because just like so many other people, I listened to the little voice on my shoulder, to members of the discouragement club, that group of people in our profession that find ways to discourage others from achieving success. And for 2 years, I found lots of different excuses. It felt nice and comfortable because I could blame anyone but myself. And eventually I persuaded Dave, for no other reason than simply finding the courage one day to have a conversation. And I said, this probably isn't going to be something that you can afford. It may not be something you're interested in, but it would be remiss of me not to at least suggest to you that we need to have a conversation about covering you as the breadwinner in the family. And to my surprise, Dave said yes. It was December the 8th, 1991, we had that conversation. And within just a couple of weeks, Dave had been accepted by the insurance company with a small rating because he had diabetes. And he became my very first client in the business in 1991 that I generated myself. Very, very sadly, within 2 months of Dave becoming my first client, Dave, just like my father all those years before, was also diagnosed with cancer. This time it was a very, very aggressive form of stomach cancer. Just a few days after his diagnosis, Dave was admitted to hospital, and just a few days after that, Dave was dying. Now, I'm lucky. I have a lovely, large family, brothers and sisters, and my mum, and we took it in turns to sit by Dave's bedside, and we were there for about 4 days, 24 hours a day. There was one moment in those 4 days where Dave and I were alone, and I was holding his hand. The pain was etched across his face, and I felt helpless. So sad that I knew I was going to be losing my best friend. In the final moments before he closed his eyes for the last time, he looked me square in the eye and he said to me, "Son, thank you for what you did for your family. I'm so proud of you." And that was the greatest gift my stepfather Dave, my best friend in the world, could ever have given me. Because in that moment, he said to me, "Thank you for what you did for your family." He didn't say, "Thank you for the goals that you set, that you wrote down on a piece of paper, that you promised the world that you would deliver at one point in the future." He said to me, "Thank you for what you did." And it was in that moment I had my epiphany. In that moment, I found the rules for success right there in that hospital bedroom. I realized that the greatest determining factor for all of our success is the things that we do. Taking ideas, learning them, pushing the objections and the interference to one side, taking control of the process and having conversations with passion with as many people as we possibly can. Ladies and gentlemen, you are all brilliant, but you all have the ability to be even more brilliant. So go out there, have as many conversations as you possibly can. Remember that this is one of the most noble professions, and we are all so blessed to not just be in this profession, but to be part of $1 Million Round Table. Thank you all. Have a great year, and I look forward to seeing you soon.